Okay. So let us discuss with respect to exceptions in Java. Okay. So basically, an exception in Java is an event. Okay. Basically, an exception in Java is an event that occurs during the execution of a program. Okay. And due to this event will disrupt its normal flow. Okay. Its normal flow. So basically, an exception in Java is an event that occurs during the execution of a program that disrupts its normal flow. Okay. It is an object that represents an error condition or unexpected situation in a program. Okay. What is an exception? First, let us try to understand what is an exception. An exception in Java is an unexpected event that occurs during the execution of the program, which will disturbs, okay, which will disturbs, let me try to write it as disturbs the normal flow of the program. That is known as an exception. Okay. What is an exception? An exception is nothing but it is an unexpected event which occurs during the execution of a program, which disturbs its normal flow and results in abrupt termination of the program. Okay, and results in abrupt termination of the program. Okay, so this can be considered as exception in Java, termination of the program. I'll tell you how it works. I'll tell you, don't worry. Abrupt. Okay, which will abrupt the normal termination of the program. So that is known as exceptions in Java. Now, for example, let us switch back to Eclipse and I'll try to explain that how it affects. Okay. So, for example, consider that I have a particular integer value. Okay. Integer of I is equals to 10. I have declared one variable. Right. Now, what I will do, I will try to perform division. Okay, I'll try to perform the division like system.out.println. Okay, system.out.println print I, that is the value of 10. Okay, let me directly declare. Okay, let me directly do some particular operation. I'll just try to divide like I'll try to write dividing. Okay, dividing a number. Okay, I'm dividing a number. I'm just written a println statement, and then I'll try to write one more println statement and try to write it as the number that I'm trying to divide. Okay, I'm trying to divide 10 with 5. Okay, so now once I'm trying to divide 10 with 5, okay, so this will give me some integer value. So let me try to store it as division value. Okay, or let me try to take it as value. Okay, I have taken the value. Okay, now 10 divided by 5. Now what I will do, I will try to print something. Print the same value. The value is a value after division. I'll take it like this. Value after division. What is the value that is after division? That is value it will store in the value variable. So I'll try to print the same thing. Okay. After that I'll try to print something like execution is done. Done with the execution of the code. Okay. So I've written like this. Okay. Now consider this guys that we have written one main method, right? And in this main method, I'm just trying to write print on the console using the println statement, that is divide a number. And after that, I'm trying to divide a particular number, that is 10 divided by 5, right? And after that, I'm trying to print ln statement by using then after that I'm using the println statement to print the value that I have obtained by dividing 10 with 5, right? After that, I'm just trying to print one more statement with the help of println on the console, that is done with the execution of the code. Okay. So now, if I'm executing this, run as Java application. So now in the console, if you see, there is normal flow of the program. right? Is there any event that has occurred? No, there is no event that has occurred. So there is no exception that has occurred. Okay, this is known as a normal flow of the program. What is a normal flow of the program? Whenever we are trying to write some particular program and there is no abrupt termination of the program, that time we can consider the program execution is normal. It is executing from first statement to last statement that we have written. Everything is performed as expected, right? Nothing is terminated. Everything is expected. We are trying to print something dividing a number, so that is printed. We are trying to perform division, so that has happened, and we have stored the division in the variable value, and we have printing value after division, that value that we have printed, and with one more println statement we are trying to print, done with the execution of the code. So everything is executed. So this kind of execution is a normal flow of the program, that there is no event. It is a normal flow from first line of the code to the last line of the code. Everything is executed. So this kind is called as normal flow of the program. Okay, normal flow of the program, where there is no termination. Everything in the code that we have written is executed. Now let us consider the exception. What is an exception? An exception is nothing but it is an unexpected event which disturbs the normal flow of the program, which results in abrupt termination of the program. Okay, let us try to create that exception or create that event. Okay, let me try to divide 10 with 0. Okay, I'm just trying to divide 10 with 0, guys. Okay, now let us see how the program executes. Okay, what the change that I have done? I have just tried to divide the number 10 with 0. Before we were trying to divide the number 10 with 2. Okay, let us try to execute it. Run as Java application. Okay, now you can see something in red color in the console. So this is known as an exception. An exception is nothing but an event which is an unexpected event that disturbs the normal flow of the program and results in the abrupt termination of the program. Are we seeing the entire functionality that we have written on the console that we were seeing before? No, we are not seeing, because an exception has been occurred at this particular line. See, hello.java is the class. Hello.java is the class. Colon 9, at line number 9 we are seeing this event. How to read an exception? It has occurred at hello.java at line number 9 in test1 package. Okay, in test1 package, just observe here. Okay, show in package explorer. See where it has occurred? In the left hand side, if you see, it has occurred here in test1 package. Left side, guys, console here. Okay, in this particular package, in this particular class, at this particular line. And what is the exception that has occurred? That is Java lang.arithmetic exception divide by 0 exception. Okay, in which method it has occurred? In method main. In which class? So this will give you the entire address in which the exception has occurred. So coming back, is our normal flow disturbed? Yes, our normal flow is disturbed. If the exception has not occurred, our normal flow was to print this two set of statement, but we could not see that because this is a kind of an event which occurs due to some issues in the code, or it will try to execute, or it will occur whenever there is it is a kind of special event that occurs and it will disturbs the normal flow of the program. So this is known as an exception in Java. What is an exception? It is an unexpected event which will occur during the execution of the code, and it will disturb the normal flow of the execution of the program. That is known as an exception. See, it has disturbed our normal flow. right? If this exception was not occurred, then this two particular set of statements will get executed and will be executing everything that we have written, right? But due to this exception, which was an unexpected event, the normal flow of the program was disturbed. So that is known as an exception in Java. Okay. So now how to read an exception? We can read an exception by using this particular statement. So what is the statement? So exception in thread main. In main method we have found the exception. What is the exception name? The exception name is java.lang.arithmetic exception, which is divide by zero error. Sorry, divide by zero exception. And at what position and what package it has been occurred? At test1 package. Okay, just look at here, test1 package. Okay, in hello.main. Hello is the class, main is the method. And hello.java is the class at line number 9. At line number 9. So this is how we read an exception. What is an exception? An unexpected event which will disturb the normal flow of the program. That is known as an exception in Java. Okay. So now, with respect to this, whatever the exception that we have seen, okay. So this is known as exception in Java. Okay. Now, it is an object that represents an error condition or unexpected situation in a program. So how does this works is, whenever there is an exception that will be occurred, okay, whenever there will be an exception that will be occurred, it will create an object. The JVM will try to create an object and it will try to throw that particular exception. It is basically an object that is created. Who will create the object? JVM will create the object and it will try to throw that particular exception. Okay. Next thing that we have with respect to exception is that exception handling, or why do we need exception handling? Okay. So the exception handling will ensure the normal program flow. It prevents program crashes by handling errors or exceptions properly. Okay, and it improves the code maintainability. It separates error handling logic from normal code. It improves code maintenance and it enhances debugging. It provides a useful messages about what went wrong. That is the use of exception handling. See, whenever we find an exception or whenever we result in an exception, we have to handle it. If we want our normal flow of the program to be executed and we don't want our flow of the program to be disturbed with this kind of events that is being occurred, that is exception, we have to handle those exceptions, which can be done with the help of exception handling. And why do we use exception handling? So that we ensure normal program flow, we ensure improve code maintainability, and we enhances debugging. Okay, I'll explain each one with respect to the exception handling mechanism. Okay, so the first thing before this, there are two types of exceptions in Java. Okay, one is known as checked exception, and the other is known as unchecked exceptions or runtime exceptions. Okay, so this kind of exception that we just saw, what type of exception we have just seen? Arithmetic divided by exception, or arithmetic exception, that is divide by zero. It is a kind of unchecked exception because this kind of exception has occurred at the runtime, due to which we say this kind of exception as unchecked exception, an exception that occurs at runtime. See here, this exceptions occurs at runtime. So this is known as unchecked exception. the compiler does not force the developer to handle them. Did we get any compilation error, guys? No, we did not get any compilation error, because this was a kind of runtime exception which occurred after executing or after running our program. So that is known as runtime exception. Okay, and the exception that occurs at compile time, which the compiler tries to tell the programmer handle this exception, that is known as compile time exception. Okay, so what is compile time exception? These exceptions are checked at compile time. The compiler forces the developer to handle this exception. Those are called as checked exception. Now let us see one checked exception. Okay, I will write one checked exception like this. Okay, so this is basically an object creation. Okay, so this is basically an object creation for the file handling, like this. Just let me try to minimize, guys. Okay, see, like this. See, is our compiler trying to tell me, am I getting this red line? Am I getting a compile time error? Right? So this compile time error is nothing but an checked exception in Java, because compiler is trying to force, boss, whatever the exception you are getting, please handle. So this kind of exception is called as checked exception. The exception that occurs at compile time, or compiler forces the programmer to handle that particular exception, is known as checked exception. See, if I hover over this cross mark that I am getting, it is suggesting me to handle this kind of exception. It is telling multiple makers at this line, markers at this line, unhandled exception type, file not found exception. Okay, this is a kind of checked exception. So the compiler is forcing the programmer to enclose this kind of line of code into an exception handling mechanism or a try catch block. Okay, so this is called as compile time exception or checked exception. Okay, so now suppose if I am trying to surround this particular line of code with try catch, see, with try catch, that exception will go. Now I'm not getting that underlined red color compile time error, right? Because I have handled that exception. Clear this? So this is known as types of exceptions in Java. And an exception that occurs at the runtime after executing the code, that is known as runtime exception. The exception that occurs during the compilation of the code is known as checked exception. In the case of runtime exception, the compiler will not tell us to handle that. In the case of checked exception, the compiler will tell to handle the line of code. In the case of unchecked exception, compiler will not tell us to handle that particular line of code with try catch block. Instead, we will be getting at the runtime. Whereas in the case of checked exception, we will be getting a particular compilation error by which compiler is trying to tell us, try to handle that particular exception with the try catch block. So these are the types of exception: checked exception and unchecked exception. There are multiple types or multiple examples for checked exceptions. Okay, one we saw, that is IO exception that we saw. There is SQL exceptions, there is file not found exception. We saw file not found exception, there are IO exceptions, there are SQL exceptions. Okay, and with respect to unchecked exceptions, we saw is the arithmetic exception, that is divide by zero error, right? Exception, sorry. And there are array index out of bound exception, which occurs in the case of arrays. And null pointer exception is basically an exception that occurs when we are trying to interact with the null object. Okay, so this is just an example with respect to unchecked exceptions. Now let us understand one more thing with respect to the exception, that is errors. And errors are the serious issues that usually cannot be handled. See, what is the difference between exception and errors? important interview question. Exception is an unexpected event which terminates the normal, which disturbs the normal flow of the program. So that is an exception. What is an error? An error is nothing but it is a serious issue which usually cannot be handled. It might be out of memory error, or it might be stack overflow error, or it might be virtual machine error. Okay, it cannot be handled. Okay, so that is known as an error. Okay, see, so this is divide by zero, dividing a number by zero. Okay, so here I have written this particular dividing a number, right? So is an event has occurred? No, here in this particular case there is no exception that has been occurred, right? Because we are trying to divide with 5, right? So as we are trying to divide with 5, so we are not getting an exception, due to which the normal flow continues, right? See, for example guys, I'll try to repeat one more time. Okay, so now consider we have this line of code. Okay, let me try to repeat everything one more time. Okay, so it was like this, right? 10 divided by 0, and there was 2 more statements that we had. We had done with the execution of the code was one statement. Okay, and there was one more statement. There was one more statement that was something. Apple is a fruit, right? This was one more statement. Okay. So now consider here, guys. Okay, consider here that this is not the normal flow of the program, right? This is not the normal flow of the program, because here if I am executing, I'll be getting the runtime exception, that is java.lang.arithmetic exception divide by 0 exception I have occurred. Okay, I have received this exception. Now how to handle it? We have to handle this kind of exception with the help of try block. Now which is the line of code that is throwing an exception? The line 10, right? The line 10 is throwing an exception. So let me try to enclose that particular line of code with the help of try block. So this is exception handling I am trying to do. I am trying to enclose the line of code that will throw an exception with a try block, and then I'll try to write the catch block. Okay, catch, C-A-T-C-H, catch. This will be the exception object reference for the exception object that I'll be thrown for the above line of code. So this is exception E. Okay, so this is the object, and once I have occurred with that particular object, I'll try to print something. So what I'll try to print? I'll try to print exception has occurred. Like this I'll try to print it. Okay, just a statement guys to print something. Now if I am saving this particular line of code and if I execute, so this will not throw an exception, but our normal flow of the program continues. See, our normal flow of the program is continued. We have first written dividing a number, we have got dividing a number, then we are trying to declare one value, then we are trying to divide with value that we have stored. We are trying to divide the number 10 with 0, and we are trying to store that value in this particular variable value. But at this particular line of code, we are getting an exception, that is divide by 0 exception, and due to that exception, the catch block will be executed, and we are getting exception has occurred, and our normal flow of the program continues, right? So this is exception handling in Java. Exception handling can be done with the help of try block, where we try to enclose the code that might throw an exception inside the try block, and the object reference that is created for that particular exception will be exception E reference, which we will be considering for the catch block, and we try to write the set of statement that we want to execute whenever an exception has occurred. So this will help us in normal flow of our program. Now let us try to consider some line of code and try to check whether that will be executed when an exception has occurred or not. Okay, for example, it goes like this. Okay, suppose consider there are other set of statements that we have written after try. For example, division is over. I'm just trying to write some set of statement, guys. Division is over. Okay, and I'll try to write one more statement by declaring a value as int of z is equals to 50, and let me try to print this particular z value. Okay, z like this. Okay, I'm just trying to print the variable that I have declared. Now, whenever an exception has occurred inside a try block, okay, inside a try block, whenever an exception has occurred, and whatever the line of code that we have written after the line of code which will throw an exception will be skipped, and the catch block will be executed. I'll repeat one more time. Whatever the set of statement that we have written after the line of code which might throw an exception, all those set of statements will be skipped and the catch block will be executed. And next, it will the normal flow of our program, because we have handled the exception with the help of try catch block. See, run as Java application. We are getting dividing a number, then we are getting an exception. Due to this exception, we are executing exception has occurred. After that, we are trying to execute the normal flow of our program. So this will be a case when an exception has occurred. Okay. Now, when there is no exception, let me try to create no exception. So now I am trying to divide the number 10 with 2, so that will give me 5. Right. So now there will be no exception that will be occurred. If there is a no exception, then whatever the code that we have written inside the try block will be executed. Catch block will be skipped. Catch block will be executed only when we have seen an exception, or only when an exception has occurred. If there is no exception, all the lines of code that we have written in the try block will be executed and the normal flow continues. See, like this, run as Java application. Now there is no exception. So dividing a number, then division is over, then z 50, 50, then that the value of z that I am trying to print, then normal listing. Apple is a fruit, done with the execution. This execution is not done because there is no exception. This catch block will be executed only there is an exception inside the code. I mean, only an exception that has occurred for the code that we have written inside the try block. Only then we could see the catch block will be executed, right? But if there is no exception that has occurred, in that particular case, the catch block will not get executed, and it will skip. If there is an exception has occurred, it will skip the next set of lines of code that we have written in the try block, and catch block will be executed. In the case of exception occurred, okay. So this will be the flow of our try and the catch block. So this is exception and exception handling in Java. Okay. So this is nothing but exception and exception handling in Java. Correct?